What's going on, folks? So just before we get into today's show, you started seeing these Stop the Presses episodes hop back in the filter, the best idea, wherever you're downloading your podcast. After thinking about it and talking to the people that are subscribed on Patreon, it makes the most sense to just do a week in between when I put the episode out and putting it out for everybody to download. This podcast thing, I'm kind of figuring it out as I go, and it really does make the most sense to just put as much content out as I possibly can, and the people that are on Patreon with me agree, luckily, and I really, really appreciate that. So the episodes will come out first there, and then a week later, they will come out on the regular podcast feed. And then obviously the best idea will come out on the feed as it normally does. So appreciate it, and here we go. Welcome back, everybody. Best Idea Podcast. I'm Stephen Cochran. Stop the Presses, episode 13. And this one doesn't start off on a good note. You've probably seen in the news what is going on in Milwaukee County. Long story short, there was a fatal attack on a Christmas parade by a guy named Darrell Brooks in Waukesha, Wisconsin. I found seemingly the most detailed article I could, actually from the Daily Mail in the UK, which is strange. More and more, I find really good articles about what's going on in our country on the Daily Mail and the Independent, which aren't in this country. But either way, so it says, why was Darrell Brooks even on the streets? Waukesha Christmas parade killer with 22-year rap sheet was bailed twice this year alone and had bond lowered from $7,000 to just $500 in February. So the reason I wanted to talk about this, number one, if you haven't seen the videos that are all over the place, absolutely fucking horrific. You see his red SUV just plowing through a Christmas march. And then on pretty much every article you can find about this, there's pictures of the 5 people that were killed. This guy, Brooks, had been recently let out of jail. So the article starts, Milwaukee's district attorney faces furious questions about why alleged Waukesha parade killer Darrell Brooks was out on the streets after it emerged he had been bailed out twice this year, despite a lengthy criminal history stretching back to 1999. So this is like a prime example of what is generally a good idea taken to an extreme and gone bad. It's reminiscent of the defund the police idea, which was the extreme version of a rethinking of what it means to be a cop, what services you should be employing when you're a cop, and what should we delegate to other departments of the government. But it was taken all the way to the end, and there were people thinking that we should just remove all police departments, period. And that is a really stupid idea. So with cash bail, the thing about cash bail is it only hurts poor people. That's unmistakable. You can't get away from that fact that a $1,000 cash bail to somebody of even modest means is not that big a deal, whereas somebody that has to make it to work every day or they'll lose their apartment, $1,000, they may not have it. And it depends on what state you're in as to how much of that money you actually have to come up with to bond yourself out. Bail and bond are two different things. Some places you got to pay 100% of it, like is the case in Milwaukee. And other places, or in the whole state. Actually, I'm sorry, not just Milwaukee, but in other places you only have to put down a percentage. And then if the person shows up to court like they're supposed to, that money is returned to whoever paid for it. So it depends where you are. In this case, there was an incident where this guy, Brooks, was in jail for punching his ex-girlfriend in the face and then running her over with his car. And his bail started off at $7,000, and because he requested a speedy trial and they could not offer him one because of the pandemic, it was reduced to $500. He posted it and he got out. So this DA, Chisholm, released a statement Monday, this is from the article, admitting Brooks, 39, should not have been released on a $1,000 bond earlier this month following an alleged hit-and-run incident involving his girlfriend. But Chisholm, 58, had recently boasted about letting a nonprofit opposed to cash bails audit his office and has spoken repeatedly about trying to reduce his county's prison population. So you can hear from like the tone of the article that they're painting every possible rendition of this idea as being one and the same, and they're not. Doing something about cash bail for nonviolent criminals is a good idea, depending on how many times what their record is. I mean, there's got to be reasonable restrictions on that, but all in all, recognizing that cash bail really only affects people that don't have money already. It doesn't have anything to do with the crime you committed or anything like that. If you are poor already and you have to sit in jail because you're poor, that's an unfair aspect of the criminal justice system that we should do something about. That doesn't mean that somebody with the following history that I'm going to give you for this person should be given that same leniency. 1999, aggravated battery. 2000, carrying a concealed weapon. 2009, resisting an officer. 2010, strangulation and suffocation, domestic abuse. 2011, probation violation. 2011, failure to appear in court. 2011, bail jumping. 2012, bail jumping, failure to appear in court. 2020, possession of a firearm for a convicted felon. Endangering safety, reckless use of a firearm, possession of methamphetamine. 2021, domestic battery, bail jumping, endangering safety, disorderly conduct, resisting arrest. That is not the sort of record of somebody that we should be trying to make sure doesn't pay too harsh a penalty for a crime that, whether or not they committed it, isn't that serious. This guy was committing very serious crimes. Now, this good policy with good intention and the potential to help the people that need it has been stained with this and a lot of other people. This is not the only guy. This is just the most recent one. But there's a lot of this going on in California where they've taken very good criminal justice reform ideas to the absolute extreme to kind of outrank each other in who's the most reformist of the reformers. And it's leading to outcomes like this. And so hopefully people get their shit straight and stop trying to win awards and just do what makes practical sense. And they go into some of these outcomes in the article. According to the data compiled by the Milwaukee Employment and Training Institute, reveals that more than half of all African American males in their 30s and 40s residing in the state of Wisconsin have at some point served a stint in state prisons. So there you go, laying out some of the disparities that exist. But Chisholm's experiment, as the New Yorker called it in 2015, detailing a progressive policy, has been largely unsuccessful. Since the early days of the pandemic, the county that Chisholm has overseen for the past 14 years has seen crime rates, especially those of the violent sort, soar to new levels. Homicide rates, for instance, have seen a nearly 100% increase between 2019 and 2020, from 97 murders 2 years ago to 190 last year. Now, I'm not going to tie all of those to his stance on cash bail. I don't know the other policies that he's put in place, but I know that based on this one, if this is the sort of attitude that this guy's office has taken, it's not a surprise why they've seen those escalations. There are smart ways to do, and the next thing that I want to talk about actually has to do with the other side of that coin. What I think is a smarter way to do criminal justice reform. This is from the Optimist Daily, and the headline is, Philadelphia will no longer pull drivers over for low-level infractions. Last week, Philadelphia Mayor Jim Kenney signed the Driving Equity Act, and man, that word equity has really been overused these days. But anyway, back to the article, making it the first major city in the U.S. to ban low-level traffic stops. The law, which will go into effect in early 2022, will also require city police to collect and publicly release data on traffic stops. So we've seen and heard over and over again, either videos from people's phones or dash cams from cops, the interactions between police and people on the roads is one of the focal points of police safety. That is dangerous to pull people over for traffic infractions, and we've seen a lot of those go really badly for cops and for people that have been pulled over. And it seems sensible with the technology we have now that there are some infractions that police don't need to involve themselves in at all, even though the overwhelming majority of those interactions end just fine with somebody getting a ticket. We don't even have to have the ones that don't. I mean, things like a broken taillight or how visible your license plate is or brake tags, things like this, to me, a waste of a cop's time. And if that sort of thing needs to be ticketed or fixed, you can handle that when people renew their driver's license. You can use traffic cameras to deal with that and just send them a ticket. There's just smarter ways to do it, and I think Philadelphia is trying to do that. So it goes on. In order to reduce violent altercations between police and drivers, Philadelphia drivers can no longer be pulled over for infractions like driving with a single broken taillight, with obscured license plates, without an inspection sticker, with bumped issues, with items hanging on their rearview mirror. Instead of an in-person ticket, these infractions will result in a ticket that is either mailed to the driver's residence or placed on their windshield while parked. Genius, to me. Save time, money, aggravation for the cops and for people. And it finishes off saying the Philadelphia Police Department took part in drafting the new legislation and said in a statement, "We believe this is a fair and balanced approach to addressing racial disparities without compromising public safety." So the next thing that I wanted to talk about, sticking with bail, is I didn't realize that Kyle Rittenhouse, this hopefully will be the last time I talk about Kyle Rittenhouse, but Kyle Rittenhouse was on $2 million bail. I did not know that. And now that he has been acquitted, who gets the $2 million? So bail is just an insurance policy to make sure that you end up in court. It's not a forfeiture. You're not writing a check to the court for them to keep, at least not in all cases. There might be some exceptions to that, but generally, as I understand it, the money goes in, it's held to make sure that you show up to court, and then when the proceedings are finished, whether you're, acquitted or, actually, I'm not sure what happens when you're convicted, but you get that money back. Well, this is $2 million that was raised partially by his mom and partially by this attorney named Lynn Wood, and now there's a legal fight over who gets to keep the money. So this article from the Chicago Tribune by Stacey St. Clair and Christy Gutowski. Next, Kyle Rittenhouse legal battle. Who gets the $2 million bail posted after his arrest? With the ink barely dry on the acquittals, Kyle Rittenhouse is expected to face another legal battle over the $2 million bail posted for his arrest. Rittenhouse's attorney filed a motion shortly after the verdict arguing that the money should be given to the teenager because it was raised on his behalf. Another party, however, the Fight Back Foundation, thinks the money belongs to them, and they filed to get the money before Rittenhouse's attorneys even did. So in the article, the Fight Back Foundation, an organization run by right-wing lawyer Lynn Wood, filed a motion shortly after the verdict Friday asking that the money be refunded to that group. The seven-figure amount, however, was posted by Rittenhouse's former attorney, John Pierce, and included contributions that Rittenhouse's mother, Wendy, helped to collect. And it goes on to say, John Pierce is the person who posted the bond. Rittenhouse defense attorney Mark Richards said following the teen's acquittal, all of that money was raised on behalf of Kyle. Lynn Wood and Fight Back say they're entitled to it. There was $500,000, I think, that came directly from Wendy Rittenhouse from the money she raised. So there's going to be a fight over that. So Lynn Wood, you may recognize the name. He's one of the attorneys that became especially prominent while Trump was in office. I mean, for some of you who are old enough to remember, like the JonBenet Ramsey case, he represented her parents in their defamation suits. So he's been around for a long time, but really came to the forefront again, I guess, as one of the people that is still pushing on about, the integrity of the 2020 election and whether or not Biden actually won and all that sort of stuff. So he's been around for a long time, and he jumped on the side of Rittenhouse. I don't know how much of the money he raised versus how much Rittenhouse's mom raised, but now he wants that money back. In September, a foundation lawyer wrote a letter to the Kenosha Circuit Judge Bruce Schroeder, who presided over Rittenhouse's case, saying the money should be returned to Wood's organization at the trial's end. The letter states that Pierce was an agent of the organization when he posted the money, but no longer has any ties to the group. And accordingly, the $2 million shall be returned to the Fight Back Foundation, attorney Xavier Salas wrote. I'm not sure if they were paying attention to the trial to see how much this judge, Bruce Schroeder, was a fan of Kyle Rittenhouse, but I think this is probably going to be a losing argument for the Fight Back Foundation. Why even have this argument in public? I mean, granted, $2 million is a lot of money, but you raise that money, assuming that you were on this kid's side. Now you're going to publicly try and claw back this money from this 18-year-old kid who's now lionized in the people's eyes that gave you this money in the first place. Just seems like a bad fucking idea long-term, strategy-wise. That's just my opinion, but I think it's hilarious they're fighting over this money. So I'll keep an eye on it, and I'll let you know who wins. So this next thing, they finally passed one of these bills. They've got two bills to push through. The Biden administration has. One of them is the infrastructure bill, and the other one is this Build Back Better thing. They passed the infrastructure one, so I figured it would be worth it to quickly go through and look at what's actually in it, just because it's a lot of money and it's our money, and we should at least pay attention to how they're spending it, and not all of this is going to be a waste. A lot of it we can expect is going to be a waste. So the whole thing together is $1.2 trillion. That's not what's actually being spent. We've talked about this a little bit before. That's what's being spent over 10 years, but with this particular bill, that's not even what's being spent in new money. There's only like $550 billion in new money. So this bill represents about $55 billion every year in new spending. So it's just one thing to put out on the table. It's not $1.2 trillion, write a check, and that's it. A lot of this money, for example, they're taking from money that wasn't spent from the pandemic relief bill that they passed last year. Or, earlier this year. So the most obvious one is what we all think of with infrastructure, roads and bridges. That's the two main talking points of everybody talking about infrastructure is roads and bridges. Well, it's $110 billion for roads and bridges. We get somewhere between a C and a D rating on driving. Any structure on which we drive in this country is generally rated really poorly. So $110 billion, much needed, good idea. Plus construction jobs are, and to drive on those newly constructed roads, there's $7.5 billion for electric school buses. I didn't even know they had electric school buses yet, but there's going to be $7.5 billion spent to build and buy them for communities that are, as they describe it, low income and rural. So we've talked about this electric market. There's another $7.5 billion also for a nationwide network of charging stations for electric vehicles. So it's a total of $15 billion on the EV side. And we talked about like some of the tax credits they're doing for electric cars and all that. I've said it before that I'm a big fan of these investments because I think this is obviously where transportation is going long term. We should find a way to do it with more renewable energy than fossil fuel. I think it's just going that way, so we might as well do the best we can to prepare for it and do it well. And that's what government is for. A good government, part of it is to be like a really smart venture capital firm, basically. You find smart ways to allocate money and create markets. And, Tesla obviously is the forefront of the entire electric vehicle market. But a lot of the smaller things we don't really think about, those have to be funded, or they're going to be funded by government. So take something like school buses, electric school buses. Public schools is a smart way to create that market. And then once it catches on, then it becomes more private money. I think this is a really smart expenditure in this bill. There's also $65 billion to expand broadband access. It's just, we have a really big country. There's 340 million people, but it's a very large space that we live in. But considering the stature of the United States, the fact that we have as many kids as we do without internet access is it's embarrassing. It's appalling how many kids don't have access to just clean drinking water in their homes, which they also get into this. But $65 billion for broadband access, that to me is a smart investment. $55 billion for lead pipe replacement, chemical cleanup, and clean drinking water, and that also is going to be for tribal communities. That is a hefty sum of money. It's probably not enough. I definitely am not in a position to critique it. It just sounds low. And then they do $65 billion to upgrade power lines and power grid, which big ticket. I don't really understand what that means. I know there's a lot of places where we can't bury power lines, for example, so I don't know what they mean by update the power lines. I did open the bill and started sifting through it. It's ridiculously long, first of all. If you've never tried to read a piece of legislation, it's a pain in the ass. It's just top to bottom legal language. Everything has definitions in it. You could get through it if you cared about it. And so I don't care about the whole thing, but I was curious what exactly that meant by upgrade the power grid, because I hear shit like that, all the time, or read that sort of thing. I don't really know what that means, but an example of what that means is they're paying for reports to be written on what are called microreactors and how those might be used across the country to make the grid more resilient, meaning that if something goes wrong in one place, it doesn't ruin the electricity in another place, So these small microreactors are nuclear reactors. And I think that using that technology is a good idea. I think they do it in other places, and we could probably figure out how to do it here. So part of what they pay for is a report to study that and see if I'm just talking out of my ass like an idiot, or if it really is a useful idea for the grid that we have. So there's a lot in it. 1.2 trillion. It's a good thing that the bill passed. Anybody that pays any attention to really not just politics, but the news broadly has heard this fucking word infrastructure for at least 15 years. So the fact that some of it is getting done is a really good thing. But a problem with it that I've mentioned before is the people that are doing. I'm really concerned about the people that are going to be implementing this plan, which is why I glossed over a lot of it. I only pointed out 3 or 4 things because I'm not really sure how much of this is actually going to get done. I mentioned to you guys that it is Mitch Landrieu that Biden has decided is going to oversee this infrastructure money. And I said it on a previous podcast, but I'll just repeat it. This was a really bad fucking idea. This guy does not have a history of actually getting shit done. He has a history of brown-nosing and getting checks written to him, but not a history of actually doing stuff with it. Unfortunately, when you look into it, you can't find much except for glowing articles about Mitch Landrieu because he was the mayor after Katrina, and he got $2.4 billion for the city and all this sort of stuff. Even from the local New Orleans papers like NOLA.com or WDSU, I have to go to a national leaning right newspaper who are going to be critical of everything Biden does anyway, for anyone to be even honest about Mitch Landrieu. I mean, he, for example, when the latest mayor of New Orleans took over, there was millions and millions of dollars unspent for projects. And so it's he got this money, but he left a lot of it unspent. And the Sewage and Water Board, for example, that's the city organization that's responsible for draining the streets when it floods, was run like shit under his administration. So there's definitely cause for concern on this infrastructure bill, but they passed it, and we'll see what happens. And with the other bill, with this Build Back Better stuff, we'll see if they can push it over the line. I think the whole thing is just gone mostly to shit. Instead of having a couple of good ideas, it looks like they're going to have about 20 ideas, and they're all going to be half-assed done. Some things that I know that are still in it as of yesterday, there's going to be, if it passes, they passed it in the House. Whether or not they pass in the Senate, I don't know. We'll see. But they're going to expand this child tax credit as it is right now. So I think that is $300 a month for kids under 6, $250 for kids over 6, but under 18. So that is still in there. Free school meals is still in there. They put another $500 in Pell Grants, so that raises that up to $7,000 possible if you get a Pell Grant. So there's a couple of good things. We've talked about a lot of the good ideas that were stripped out of it, unfortunately, like the community college idea of covering that for people, which would have been really smart. And you'd have seen the benefits of that within 2 years, but it's not in there anymore. So we'll see what the fuck happens with that. And since we're talking about government and government type stuff, and since we're talking about government, we might as well stick with it for another minute. There's another article I found, and they announced this today, but it's from Fortune.com, and Biden's plan. The title is Biden's plan to release oil reserves to address rising fuel prices draws ire from OPEC plus. So this is Fortune.com. It's written by Grant Smith. And the reason this article stuck out to me is because it is very misleading. And I'll tell you why in a second. So it starts off with OPEC Plus officials warn that they are likely to respond to plans by the world's largest oil consumers to release oil from their strategic stockpiles, setting up a fight for control of the global energy market. President Joe Biden is set to announce a plan, which he announced this morning, to release reserves from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve on Tuesday in tandem with China, India, Japan, and South Korea, according to officials briefed on the matter. The move, weeks in the planning, is designed to ease the New Year's rise in fuel prices for drivers and businesses. And it goes on to say the tussle threatens the biggest disruptions in geopolitical politics of oil since the price war between Saudi Arabia and Russia in early 2020. Well, that's not that fucking long. As the stake in the price of the world's most important commodity, as politicians and central bankers contend with the strongest inflationary surge in more than a decade. It also shows the strained relationship between Washington and Riyadh, traditionally a cornerstone of U.S. relations in the Middle East. Okay, all that aside, this is bullshit. Let me tell you why. So I've been trying for a while now, a couple of months, to filter down and make plainer this book that I read called The Prize. And it's all about the history of oil, and I have, as of yet, failed to take on that project successfully. There's an episode I did, maybe 20 episodes ago, where I tried to summarize the first 3 chapters, and my intention was to go through the book and do every 3 chapters, but it didn't work. So I'm still actually trying to figure out how to do it. But the thing about this article that relates to that book, something that I understand better now than I did before, is these outward threats mean absolutely fucking nothing. So first of all, they're talking about these strategic petroleum reserves. This is an amount of oil that a lot of different countries set aside mostly for war purposes, okay? They learned about this in World War II, that oil is now the king of war making. If you do not have oil, you end up like Japan in World War II. A lot of the things that went wrong for Japan only went wrong because they ran out of oil. So every country in the world learned. Same thing with Germany when they were going across North Africa. Same thing with Britain when they were fighting. Oil was the foundation of that entire war and every conflict since then. And so these strategic petroleum reserves are set up for that. They're not set up for the day-to-day use that we use crude oil for. So when they say they're going to release, let's say they release 30 million barrels of oil. That sounds like a lot. 30 million barrels of oil. How many barrels of oil do you think that we use in a day? Just in this country. Just in the United States. It's like 18 million a day. 18 million barrels a day. So they're going to release 30, maybe 40. Maybe they'll release 40 million barrels. And the plan is not for them to release it all at once. If they did, it would take 2 days to go through. But they're going to, slowly trickle this oil into the market. More supply should bring down the price. That's typically how commodities work. Oil is different, though. And it always has been. The countries that produce the oil, the way that they set these prices, there's no magic to it. It is quite literally like when you're talking about OPEC Plus. This is, the OPEC stands for the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. This is a finite number of countries, and ministers from those countries get together, and they quite literally just set the price. The entirety of some countries are basically oil companies. So, and they're also not stupid. They see the writing on the wall. They see that obviously oil is not going anywhere today, but over the long term, it is. It's going to fade out over time. So they are trying to get what they can get for it now, and that is always the case. They've learned, these oil-producing countries have learned over time that if they raise the price too high, they could collapse whole economies. And the entire world economy, honestly, could get thrown to shit if they do this wrong. So what the goal is for them to raise it as high as they can, right, maybe a point or two within that breaking point. They are always trying to keep it as high as possible without breaking the system. And that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing a slew of countries that lost a lot of money over the pandemic, and they are trying to recoup those losses right now with high oil prices. The supply issue is a matter of valves in those countries. Like Saudi Arabia, for example, is one of the great oil exporters in the world. They have control over how much oil they do and do not produce. If they produced more, the price would go down. Or if they charged less, the price would go down. There is no Wizard of Oz that is forcing these prices on these countries. They set the price themselves. So then you have Biden coming in here with this threat of, well, we will, and several other countries did this too, and that's not a bad thing. I'm going to talk about that in a second, but he basically comes out and says, we're going to release 30, 40 million barrels. And it's like a threat to those countries to say, hey, look, stop raising the prices or bring them down a little bit. Or look, we'll just start releasing our own oil. But these people aren't stupid. They know that 40 million barrels wouldn't last, but a couple of months, even if you just slowly trickle it out. It's just not a lot of oil. These reserves weren't set up for this. So emptying them, you could empty the fucking things. It's not going to make that much of a difference. We just use too much oil. So it's just it's bullshit is what it is. It's them either trying to look to us like they're doing something about it when they really have no control over it whatsoever. They can say whatever they want to say. The price will be set by all of these other countries. And that is the way that it has been since the 1940s, basically. I'm sorry, excuse me, the 1960s, not the 1940s, 1960s. So Biden does not have a button in his office to reduce those prices. He has absolutely no control over the price of oil at all, period. So he falls in line with a lot of other presidents. Jimmy Carter, Obama, every president really has had to deal with the economy as a whole, but the price of oil specifically. I mean, it basically took plus some bad decisions, took Jimmy Carter out of office. 1973 was a really rough year for Nixon because of the price of oil. I mean, it's just on and on, go back as far as you want. And they really don't have that much control over it. So it's Now, the good part of this, the only good part of it, because this is not going to make any fucking difference, is that they got other countries to do it with them. They got China, India, and Japan to do it with them. We are the 4 top consumers of oil in the world. So that is a good thing. The fact that Biden or whoever he assigned to that task was able to achieve that is a very good thing. What they're actually doing, I don't think is going to make any difference whatsoever on the price of oil. Like we'll see if that plays out to be true, but that would be my prediction. So to switch the subject and lower the temperature a little bit, there's a story I found on news18.com, and the headline is Oklahoma woman kicked out of church as members mistake cilantro for marijuana. First of all, there's a video of this. And this poor woman, well, look, so it says, The members of a famous church in the U.S. kicked out a woman after they mistook cilantro for marijuana. They confronted the woman for allegedly bringing drugs into the congregation. It was like a potluck. She brought food and she brought cilantro. And she has a Spanish accent. I don't know where she's from, but she has a Spanish accent in the video. And I just can't imagine how pissed off she was that these people were accusing her of bringing weed into church. So it says, however, the woman repeatedly told him that it was cilantro for her Mexican soup. The video of the incident that occurred on November 14th in Oklahoma City is viral on TikTok. The woman who went to church on Sunday kept crying outside the church. Due to misunderstanding, nobody allowed her to enter the church. So she goes in. You got to see the video. She goes into church and she's brought this food and she's got this bag of cilantro in her hand. And this lady just rolls up on her like, you got to go. Like, you can imagine this lady sitting up at the front of the church. Church is going on right now. And this lady just sees this lady come in with some food and a bag of weed. So she runs up to her, and it's on the video. It's like, you got to get out of here. And she's like, what? What did I do? So he's like, you cannot bring drugs into this church. And she's like, it's just fucking cilantro from my soup. And she didn't believe her. So then the priest stops the church service and walks over to this woman and is just like, hey, you got to calm down. This woman's fucking hysterical. She's like, this is not me. I'm not like that. I wouldn't do that. I'm not like, she kept saying that over and over again. I'm not like that. Well, first of all, I don't like the stigma on weed. But yeah, I mean, carrying an open bag straight into church, it'd be like carrying a 6-pack. You know, be a little rude. But this guy just wasn't even listening to her at all. He was having his hand up, being all condescending and shit. And he's like, stop, slow down. And that sort of thing. So she's trying to explain herself. And he was like, look, I got to do church. You got to wait outside. So the article, the woman named Ashley Antiverso was kicked out by church members from Redemption United Methodist Church in Oklahoma City. In a viral TikTok video, the members can be seen confronting Ashley for bringing weed to the congregation, even though she repeatedly said it was cilantro for her menudo. A report in Newsweek said that the video of the incident was posted by Ashley on her TikTok. The 2-minute video has gone viral with over 3 million views. Ashley captioned the video, "They didn't even let me explain." They automatically just accused me. In the video, Ashley was seen explaining to the church members that it was cilantro for soup, not weed. Smell it, I promise you, she kept saying. I forgot that part. She kept holding it out saying, just smell it. It's just cilantro. Sorry. Ashley repeatedly said that she had brought coriander, not drugs. Later, the police reached there and investigated the whole matter. In this investigation, it turned out that the woman was innocent. Later, the church authorities issued a statement and allowed Ashley to attend prayers for the next week. I can't imagine she went back there for church again. If she did, God love her power of forgiveness, because that's some harsh shit. But I can just holding out a bag of cilantro, like, smell it, I swear it's not weed. What a horrible day. So as always, send me your thoughts and questions, corrections to thebestideapodcast@gmail.com. Please comment, follow the show. If you like the content of any episode, share it with people. See where they stand, start a conversation. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at The Best Idea. If you haven't had a chance to visit the Patreon page yet, please do that. Patreon.com/thebestidea. And I appreciate you listening, and I'll see you next time.